Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Mitchell, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning, Mary. I'm glad to be here. Looking forward to having this conversation with you today.
Me as well. I know we're going to have a wonderful conversation talking about men at work and how we have healthy relationships with one another at work and elsewhere. But before we get to all of that, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Oh, wow. I don't know that anyone has asked me that in the last decade, but I love that question. Um, I come from a very small town of about 300 people. It's probably not even a town. It would be classified as a hamlet or a village. But all the students at the time would apply for this student project, student jobs. I was 16 and I worked for that town. And a lot of it was, maintenance on the town buildings, garbage truck runs, all those different things. And so that was the first job, which was a big wake up call for me,
Hmm.
for sure.
Tell me about that. What was it? Was it that it was demanding? What was it that, was a wake-up call?
Yeah, well, I think it was just I was growing up, my mom kind of did a lot around the house, right? And she did it out of love because she didn't want us to have to, work too hard or whatever. But I didn't really have to take care of many things at a young age. And so when I got this job, I don't know. I mean, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
And especially slinging garbage, like going through picking up literally hundreds and hundreds of garbage bags and throwing them, and hanging off the side of a building, painting the eavesdrops, or just different things like that. And the bosses were just old men who were like kind of just pretty set in their ways, pretty grumpy. If you picture those two Muppets on the balcony, those kinds of guys, the peanut gallery. So there was a little bit of I would say personality difference as well. So yeah, those are a couple things.
It's interesting that you say that, our family, and many times they do things out of love. And, whether or not you do your own laundry before you leave the house or you start doing it when you're, 7, there's just different ways in which people run their households, and that's fine. And you can learn to do your laundry when you leave, and you can learn to pick up. But when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to work environments and you're in your first job, I hear this complaint routinely about the break room. People don't know how to clean up after themselves. This is common knowledge. This is, you use the fridge, you wipe it down, you wipe down whatever it might be, you throw your stuff out. And it's so interesting what is common to one person where another person doesn't even think about it. They don't think they're being disrespectful. They just it's not in their family of origin. That was maybe not a job they had, or they just didn't think that was a part of their job to do this kind of cleanup or maintenance or whatever it might be. And so, we can be that grumpy person who's been there for a while and say, you should know better, and shame and blame people, or just teach them, oh, hey, this
Mm-hmm.
is everybody's responsibility. If you use this space, you replace the toilet paper roll or whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, you know this, I know this. It all comes down to communication, right?
Mhm.
Healthy communication, because you can take two routes. As the old adage goes, you can make it you can allow it to make you bitter or better, right? And so you can get frustrated and complain, or you can actually have the conversation with the person or the employee or the boss or whatever the situation is for you to resolve that conflict in a healthy way and actually mitigate the thing, in the future. So, but very few people actually do that, right? So,
Mhm.
well, I don't know, very few people. I've certainly valued when I think about the course of my life, the people I respect the most are the people who pulled me aside and said, "Hey, this is how we do things around here, or this is what I want for you. And, when you said this or when you did this, it didn't really serve you well here in this organization, or maybe it reflected poorly on you, or whatever." Just this candid, honest conversation, but with the lens of not calling me out, but calling me up.
Mhm.
As a young leader, those are the people I respect the most. And those are the
Mhm.
people who had the courage to have that conversation, and see change, right?
Absolutely. That whole we don't know what we don't know. And we don't know that we don't know it until somebody tells us. And that those people are these lamps, right? That we see them as, oh, you are telling me this and I see how you're doing it, right? And so that
Hmm.
is instructive as well. So that you're mentoring me and an expectation is because of how it resonates with me that I can also do that. And so it's so fruitful when we decide to speak into somebody else's life because it does have this ripple, the possibility of a ripple effect. Not only how it is in our own reputation and how we see ourselves and living our own values, it is quite a gift to do something, as you said, that a lot of people just won't do because they talk themselves out of it. I'm going to be
Hmm.
nosy. I'm going to be unwanted. I'm an intruder, or they should just know better. It's not my job to speak up.
Yeah, and this is the case, and you would have said this earlier in the introduction, but I work with a lot of men who have seen success in business but want to see that same success at home. And so a lot of the conversations we have are with men about their, marriages or connection with their children. And we talk a lot about this hierarchy of competence. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before, but it's pretty well known in this space. But, we all kind of start at the base level of this. We're unconsciously incompetent, right? Where that is you don't know what you don't know, as you said. Someone has a conversation with us and we move from unconsciously incompetent to consciously incompetent. Now we know, now we're aware that there's things that we don't know, right? And then essentially, the work that I do is from that point to helping people get to um, consciously competent, meaning I can do this, I can clean up after myself, or I can, wipe up the counters, or I can clean up the break room, or change the toilet paper roll, but I have to consciously think about it, right? It doesn't happen on autopilot. And then the last step, of course, is going from consciously competent to unconsciously competent, meaning I do this now. It's a part of who I am. It's my habits, my rhythm, and I don't have to think about it. Or if I'm a professional in a certain area, I do this on autopilot, and it's fairly easy for me. And so, really, kind of what we're talking about is helping people work through that process, right? To the point where, in a shared space, we can all kind of have those same shared values and culture and all those different things, right? So I think it's a cool framework to help people understand, okay, where am I at on that? And I think, a lot of people get to that point where, that point where they're unconscious or consciously incompetent. That's like, oh, that's where the lights go off, especially for men, in the context of their marriages or whatever, or their health. They get a bad health diagnosis. It's like, oh, well, actually now going to the gym and exercising, there's a lot I don't know about this. There's a lot to learn, right? And so I just think that process, that hierarchy of competence, is so fascinating, and I love asking myself and then clients or whoever having that conversation of, in this specific area, where would you put yourself? In
Hmm.
this specific area, where would you put yourself? And so it's a pretty interesting model.
Oh, I love that so much because not only can we apply it to ourselves, and we can say, okay, try to figure out, where we are on any given topic. If I am spinning some sort of narrative about somebody else, and a lot of times we say they should know better. They should know better. It's not my responsibility. We can always pause and step back and say, well, where do I imagine they are in this framework? Right? Are they acting, they know, but they're choosing not to? They know, but they don't know how to get better.
Mm-hmm.
This person is acting just automatically. It's just a part of their cycle and their habits and what they have, how they have been formed or informed themselves. And it's a really, I think, a great way to try to assess what's going on because in an absence of a framework like that, many times we just assume that somebody is being negligent willfully,
Mm-hmm.
right? They are deciding to be unprofessional. They should know better. And so there's something wrong with them, and I don't need to do anything or think generously about them or um, or bring it to their attention because it's not my responsibility, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we just have this narrative somebody is doing it, somebody's not. And if they're not, whatever the it is, it's very easy to vilify them instead of
Mm-hmm.
taking a step back and saying, well, why is this person thinking this behavior is acceptable? Or why is this person acting in this way? And then we can not only mirror look at ourselves, but we can look and see we're all on the way. We all have things to learn and what might be going on with this person. And then maybe, as you said, I could ask that person, hey, I've
Mm.
noticed this about the break room, or I've noticed this about meetings, or I've noticed this about sales calls. This is my understanding. What's your understanding? And kind of moving from there.
Yeah, I love that, and I wrestle with the word should,
Mm,
because like you said, a lot of people think, well, they should know better. Well, says who? I mean, who is who's the determining factor of all knowledge? And I had a conversation with my mentor at one point. He's like, listen, I don't want to should all over you here, but he was like, you should, and he, he's like, Tony, I don't want to tell you what you should know, but there are some things that I'd love to bring to your attention. I'm not assuming that you should, but but we do this. We get into this trap of thinking,
Mhm,
well, they should do this, or they should do that. And it's like, well, man, maybe just give them the benefit of the doubt, because you have no idea, or maybe it was just an off day. Maybe
mhm.
just came to work. They had a crazy blow up with their wife or their kids or whatever. They're stressed out. They didn't sleep last night. And it's like, before you should on them, right? Just have the conversation, give them the benefit of the doubt. In fact, they even maybe step in and help clean up or help do the thing, or, and be like, hey, just help me understand here, man. Like, what's, how was your morning this morning? How was your night last night? How's the wife? How's the kids? And just start asking questions about the situation. And in my experience, 90% of the time, they're going to say things like, man, it's been tough, you know. And then you get the context. Whereas if you just jump in hot, guns blazing, then that's met with offense, because
Mhm.
a lot of times in those situations, they're not necessarily. And we talked about this before we hit record. You know, what will happen is when you press that person, or when you confront them, sometimes a conflict will come out of that, right? Because they feel backed into a corner. And it's like, well, perhaps it's not actually about that thing, that the table in the break room or the toilet paper roll or whatever situation it is. There's probably something, there's a high likelihood there's something going on beneath the surface. And so when you can gently approach them, ask questions, be curious. I love the word curious, right? And you'll usually get the context without having to have that confrontation. And trust me, that conversation goes a heck of a lot better if that's the way you approach it.
Yeah. I think it's always having the goal in mind. If in my own mind I'm thinking this person should know better, they should be doing this, they shouldn't be doing that. And um and I shouldn't have to say anything about it. Okay, well, that is a choice that you're making, but what is your goal? If your goal is to have a healthy work environment, if your goal is for that person to change their behavior because it's making it difficult for you to have a healthy work environment, it's a very disempowering place to be. I'm just going to have to sit back because they should know, so I'm not going to do anything about it. But if
Mm-hmm.
my goal is healthy work environment for everybody, win-win,
Mm-hmm.
win, right? You, me, everybody around us in the organization, then I can step into those curious conversations instead of accusatory conversations, instead of
Mm-hmm.
assuming that I know, assuming that I think that you don't know or that you do know and you're deciding not to act. Like all this kind of assumption. Many, there's a variety of different ways that you can approach somebody with your own personality and style in mind, being authentic, to open that dialogue. Um, and to find out what is going on, what is the cause. Sometimes it's just bad onboarding or lack of onboarding, or
Yeah.
somebody told them something different, or they had a bad morning. They couldn't find any matching shoes for the kids, right? Whatever it might be. And so they show up and they're not showing up as their best selves. And so if our long game is healthy relationships, healthy work environment, then getting past that should, well, whether or not they should, let's suppose they should. Well, clearly they don't
Mm-hmm.
know at this moment, or it's not resonating, or it's not sinking in. Then what's the next option to get the goal? And if the goal is health for everybody, then that should really help me think about how am I going to approach it? Or am I the right one to approach it? Is this something that needs to be brought up? Because not every thought we have or not every annoyance needs to have a conversation attached to it, right? Sometimes that's just about us and our day and how
Mm-hmm.
and what happened to us in the morning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of an organization that I was leading in at one point during my career, we had this principle that like if you if this fill in the blank with whatever topic it is, point of tension, um, or there's a lack of clarity, you talk about onboarding. This is a big point in the situation that I was in, but um, we basically said, if it hasn't been written out, you know, clearly documented and signed, had a conversation about it, we just assume that they don't know about it, right? So anyone who hasn't, so it could be any situation.
Mhm.
It could be a policy, it could be, dress code, it could be anything. But it's like, if this hasn't been written out in a policy or a guide, a book or a workbook, whatever, and they haven't signed it acknowledging that they read it and understood it, then we're not going to necessarily expect them to know it. So we had a high level of ownership on the leadership side of like, if we cannot hold someone to an expectation that we did not very clearly communicate.
Mhm.
And if we did not very clearly communicate it, and we didn't get that reception of them acknowledging that they understand it, then our assumption is going to be that they don't know. And so then it's our responsibility as a leader to educate them in that thing, right? And so whether it's writing policy or any of the things that we've been talking about, so many times it creates a lot of ownership with leaders, but it makes it really easy for us to give the staff members the benefit of the doubt because that's our primary that's where we go first. It's like, well, perhaps they didn't know, perhaps we missed something in their onboarding, perhaps this is a policy that we didn't actually sign off on. So you know what, I'm going to approach them, we're just going to have a conversation about them, just a conversation with them to let them in, on this. And then a lot of times that is the case. It was a gap on our end,
Mhm.
or sometimes they do know it was just a slip up or whatever. But when we approached, I mean, that was so critical in the organization that I was leading at that time because the leaders had a much more, I think, kind, compassionate lens with the staff members. And then the staff members really felt like their leaders had their best interest in mind and it was a safe place. And if they made mistakes, it wouldn't be heavy handed. It would just be questions, uh, compassionate questions to understand, one of the things that my wife said to me early on in our marriage that I took into business, um, I use all the time. We got into an argument one day, so like first month of marriage, and she said, Mitchell, you're not seeking to understand, you're seeking to be understood. She's like, if you could seek to understand first before seeking to be understood, then I would really appreciate that. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because I was going into conversations with like, here's my agenda, here's what I need, understand me. And I wasn't concerned about understanding where she was at first, and taking that principle into the workplace and saying, as a leader, as a vice president, as a whatever, I'm going to go into this conversation. I'm going to seek to understand their situation before I even mention the thing that I need them to understand from me. Does that make sense?
100%. I love that. And I see it going the other way as well. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times we think my boss doesn't understand, my boss this, my boss that. To pause. Well, what is going on with my boss?
Mm,
What are the ways that he or she is being pulled this way or that? Who are the people on the team? What's going on in the market? What are the shifts? What is my boss getting from their boss? Asking
exactly.
all those kinds of questions. And okay, so this is what my boss is saying that they need. Okay, let me ask instead of how this negatively impacts me. I'm going to go in and tell you why I can't do this or why this is the wrong way to do it. This again, these pauses of really getting curious whether we're managing up or down. This is not, and you're not saying this, and I'm not saying this, an annihilation of our wants and needs, but it's actually how do we get our needs met? Our needs are much more likely to be met if we come in with softer edges, coming in because everything is relational. So if I treat the other person in front of me, whether they're my spouse, my kid, my boss, my colleague, as another person who also has needs and desires, and if I'm thinking about that relationship, then the way that I approach it, because I'm we solve problems with people, right? We move together with another
Mhm.
person, not, against them. And so if I
Mhm.
have all that in mind and how I approach things that really are difficult for me, I'm going to usually approach it in a more fruitful way that they can actually hear what I'm saying instead of shutting them down. Because as you
Mhm.
said, a lot of times what I want to say is, you this, you that, this is what I need, this is what I want. You can do all of that, but how you do it and the way that you do it, in the way that you can be generous in doing it, and therefore it can grow in a healthy way and actually get your issues addressed and heard and worked on, is so much about approach, starting with ourselves, finding out what's going on with us, and then deciding who this other person is
Mhm.
and how they want to be approached and what's important to them, and then working together.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, that approach is so key. So key. How you show up. And it's not even just your words, it's your energy.
Mm,
And I did an episode on this just a little while back, but all about how we read each other's energy, like on an instinctual level. Like you feel someone's energy before when they walk in the room before they even speak.
mhm,
And so it's so important to not just to say the right things, but to be cautious of your posture, your facial expressions, the softness in which you approach someone. I was having this conversation with a client of mine a little while ago, and you know, this phrase sort of resonated with him, and not just in the home, but in his workplace. He's an entrepreneur, and with our parenting as well. And the phrase is this: to have thin skin, or so many of us have thin skin and hard hearts, but what we really want is thick skin and soft hearts, right? And so whether I'm a husband, I can go in with thin skin, being really easily offended, and hard hearts, hard towards my wife, my kids, or I could have thick skin, be hard to offend and just be, always giving people the benefit of the doubt, and soft hearts, approaching everyone with softness, whether that's as a father, as a husband, as a VP, as an employee. If we could make that shift from thin skin, hard hearts to thick skin, soft hearts, man, our relationships, our workplaces, everything would be so much better.
mm. I love that. What if you set the intention for the new year of, I'm going to be hard to offend? And
Hmm.
I am going to take whatever I used to take offense at and do something else with it and say, what's going on with them that they would say this? Or, again, this curiosity, what could I do instead? Realizing that offense is a choice and it is good information. This is offending me. Why? Because it doesn't have
Hmm.
to offend me or annoy me or whatever it might be. Those are patterns that we have gotten into, and we have many times lazily slid into them and accepted them instead of questioned them as to what is that information telling me about myself. And it's just sometimes it's good. Sometimes we ought to be offended and angry, right? These are
Hmm.
not bad. It's just information. But if we decide it's gospel truth and there's nothing we can do about it, that means the other person has to change so that I won't be annoyed or offended or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, that is not true. These
Hmm.
are choices that we can continually make. I know we've gotten off on this, which I love our discussion, but I want to hear more about you. How did you get to what you're doing right now and with the Dad National Podcast? Is that what it's called?
The Dad Nation podcast, yeah.
The Dad Nation Podcast. But so tell me how you got from your first job with the city in the small town to where you are now.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a huge question, but I'll give
Yes.
you the Cliff's notes on it all. But yeah, so I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional home. Textbook. My my therapist said I had the textbook dysfunctional family. Father was an alcoholic. I was a baby boy. Two older sisters, and a lot of drugs, alcohol, crime, abuse in my family growing up. And so I was exposed to a lot at a very early age and was forced to grow up very quickly in many ways. And so I grew up and ended up getting married. And then I thought I had a lot of my issues kind of dealt with. Um, but what I learned real quick is within 3 years, those unhealed wounds from my childhood begin to bleed into my marriage. And what I didn't realize was they were significantly affecting my professional life as well. But it really all kind of came to a head, because what I'll do, Mary, is I'll share a couple turning points with you, because a lot of people want to know, like, what got you to where you are? What was that catalyst? And so me and my wife, we were married for about 3 years at this time. There were two turning points for me. The first one was a fight. The second one was a funeral. Okay, so the first one, the fight being, if you can picture with me, I was sitting with my wife on the couch in the living room, and we had a fight about, we were talking about kids, and I wanted to be a dad. I always wanted to be a dad, and because knowing my background, I was like, I'm going to give my kids a life that I didn't have. And when I was talking to her about that, she was like, "Are you kidding me? I would never bring a child into this relationship.
Mm.
This is way too unhealthy." And I was like, "What?" Like I had no idea. And that was the first day that spiraled, and we used the D word, which we swore we would never use. We would never even joke about divorce. Things were very hard. And so there was that fight. And then for the next week, I was going to work and coming home, and I was thinking, she might not be home when I go home. She may not even be there. And to give you some context, I had recently been let go of a senior leadership position. And, especially as men, I don't know, women too, but our identities are really wrapped up in what we do, in our careers. And I spiraled, Mary. Like I ended up 60 pounds overweight. We were 100 grand in debt. I was medicating daily with drugs and alcohol. Like it all, like I was in a rock bottom of rock bottoms. And now I was dangerously close to divorce. Like I felt like we were one fight away. And so this was the week after. The second turning point for me was that that next week, literally 7 days later, I was invited to sing at a funeral. And the funeral was for this very wealthy man. He was a philanthropist. There was about 2,000 people in the room. And as I was getting ready to sing the last song, I was just strapping on my guitar, and I overheard the minister ask the congregation, the people in the room, after talking about all the things that this man had done. He asked them, "Are you living a life worthy of imitation? If you were to die today, would you be proud of the legacy that you left?" Mary, that question struck so deeply with me. I could barely choke out the lyrics to the last song, because all I could think was at that point was, man, if this were my funeral, if this were my memorial service, nobody would be looking at my life and saying, I want to model the marriage he had. I want to model the finances he had, or the level of health, how he took care of his body. They probably would have said at that point, man, he had a hard life, and then it ended too soon. You know, and it was sad. I had this vivid image of where I was headed. I was headed for obesity, alcoholism, just like my dad, like his dad, and loneliness. And so that day I left the funeral determined to make a change, determined to die to whatever I needed to become the man I needed to be for my wife and hopefully my children one day. This was about 10 years ago. But we hear this all the time. We hear about, generational curses and generational cycles. And I believe every family that's turned a corner has a curse breaker. For me and my family, I am that curse breaker, and that was what I was determined to do. And so I went home, and within, I don't know, about a couple of weeks, I rallied 5 men around me, men who my ceiling was their floor. They were living where I wanted to go, and I shared what I wanted into my marriage and my fitness and my finances and all those things in my career professionally, and they held me to that standard. They held me high when they stood with me in my victories, and they picked me back up after my losses. And Mary, within a year and a half, 18 months, we paid off the 100 grand of debt, completely restored our marriage. I lost the 60 pounds, built a lean, strong body, and became clean and sober and focused for the first time in my life. Did all that deep healing work. And yeah, then I started just helping friends of mine, building building budgets for them, helping them get out of debt, going to the gym, training them, helping them get closer with their wives. I just did it because I was passionate about it. And one of my mentors at the time said, "Hey, man, if you really want to have an impact, if you really want to have a life worthy of imitation, you need to start a podcast and share this message with the world." And so I launched the Dad Nation podcast. Within about 6 months, it became a globally top rated 5% podcast. And then launched my coaching practice 6 months into that. And so within another 18 months, I had scaled into a six-figure coaching practice and a globally recognized podcast. And so, but it's all from, I heard this, Ed Milet said this on his podcast a little while ago. He said, "You are the most qualified to help the person you used to be,
Mm.
Mary." And so that's all I do is I help the person I used to be because I was a person who business made sense. The professional life made sense. I could lead board meetings all day. I could cast vision. I could build things. But when I came home, the puzzle pieces didn't fit together. I was powerful at work, but powerless at home. I could lead teams all day, but I came home and I didn't know how to talk to my wife, you know? And so that's basically how I got to where I am today. Does that make sense?
Thank you for sharing that story. And I'm so happy for you that you have found this passion. And there is, we have all these different difficulties in our life that, we don't wish on anybody. We don't wish on our worst enemy. And yet those difficulties, those real true difficulties, if we listen to them, can give us a path of where to go and who to help, right? We're all here to
Mm-hmm.
help each other. And we all have these unique lenses because of what we have been through and what we have chosen to do through that. If we choose, different
Yeah.
paths, what we can do. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I mean, it's raw and it's real, but I on that journey, excuse me, on that journey, I learned fairly quickly that I want to make my life about being honest, about authenticity. And if you get to know me, you get to know me. There's no masks anymore, because wearing the masks, living an inauthentic life, got me into a world of trouble. And because on the outside, I was very successful, but on the inside, my life was falling apart. And so, yeah, I've kind of dedicated my life to just being real and honest with whoever I talk with, because at the end of my life, I want to be able to say I was honest in everything,
Hmm.
so appreciate that. Thanks for asking the question.
Yeah. I have this question. I think it's really interesting, and it's a narrative that quite a few people have. They're doing really great at work and other things, their relationships, the ones that are most significant to them, who will be around them hopefully as they're dying, are not great. And one reason, my master plan for doing what I'm doing is that I see work as one of the last places where we have to get along with people in order for the business to stay afloat, let alone, get our market share or whatever. Innovation, we have to be able to work well with each other. Excuse me. And in our culture, we just have all these divides, you're right, we're right, we're left, or this religion or that religion, or whatever it might be, and we just fight with each other. But at work, we're not gonna be able to do what we need to do, work together as a team. And one of my goals is if we can teach people to work well together as a team at work and teach people how to disagree well, fruitfully, how to have honest conversations appropriately at work, right? There's a level of honesty, I think, that's appropriate at work. That can trickle down into our homes, into our families. So if it is mandated and practiced that we have difficult conversations instead of shoving it down or blowing up, then we practice those skills, then we can take those skills into our home life. Because when things are going well at work, that definitely affects home. And of course, when things are going well at home, that can affect work, and then vice versa when things are going badly in either place. So tell us about how you, with your clients, how you think about conflict and how that can translate into having healthy work environments when we deal with conflict.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think marriage is and work and parenting is all so connected. It's like spaghetti. You can't pull one noodle without affecting the rest. And that's why I kind of wrestle with this idea of work-life balance, because no week is the same. Uh, certain weeks work is hard. Certain weeks you have to work harder. Certain weeks you work less. Other weeks marriage is harder. Your kids are or your parenting is you sleep more, you sleep less. And so not every week is can be treated equal. And so this idea of balance is I feel like a bit of a moving target. And so I really kind of believe in work-life integration, and how can we have these conversations and have family and work and all those things integrated into one and have great conversation to work through these things, like so having a conversation with your wife and saying, hey, you know what, work's a little bit more demanding this week. How can we make time for one another outside or with the kids? Daddy's got to work Wednesday night this week or Thursday night or whatever. And so maybe we can make some time on a lunch break. Maybe I can come take you out for lunch but it's this intentionality. The reason why I think um, we see, I think, more success in managing conflict in work is because there's a lot at, there's a lot at stake. You know what I mean? If you don't develop those skills, you lose your paycheck, your bonus, your livelihood, right? And that's critical. But if you lose your cool with your wife or you snap at your kids, well, I mean, they'll forgive me. They'll
Mm,
understand, right? And so what happens is our colleagues, our businesses get our best, and our family gets the scraps. You know,
mm,
this was an eye-opening thing for me one time early on in our marriage. My wife said to me, she said, I mean, I was leading one of the fastest growing organizations in the country at the time, and I would come home from work, and I was telling her about all the things that were going on, and I was so excited, and she just was so dead in her reaction, and I was like, "What's wrong? Why aren't you excited?" And she said, Mitchell, you go to work and you give everyone the Mitch buffet, and you come home and you give me the scraps left over.
mm,
And for me, that was a really big wake up call of like, wow, I'm totally not in balance. I'm missing the whole point. And so, I mean, I think it's because it's really easy to define success where at work, right? So when we go to work, it's like, well, there's performance bonuses. We can see that, we've closed this many contracts. Revenue is up over the last however many quarters. It's like, oh, it's tangible, it's tactical, right? It's easy to see that I'm successful and performing well. But when you come home, the lines are very blurred, right? I make this joke with my clients all the time. Like, your 6-year-old is never going to run up to you after work and be like, "Hey, daddy, here are 10, strategic reasons why you're an effective father." Like, you know what I mean? He's never going to say that. Your wife is never going to give you a list of KPIs. Like, it's just, it's so hard to know when you're being successful or effective at being a present father or a present mother or a loving wife or a loving husband. The metrics aren't there. And so we wrestle with that because we can't measure it, right? And so the combination of there is perceived to be less on the line when we don't manage ourselves well at home, and also the lack of clarity around what makes me better. uh you combine those two things and it's really easy to see why we slip up, right? um and why conflict can be prevalent at home more so than at work, right? But we were talking about this before we hit record. Whether it's in business or whether it's at home, there are reasons, there are drivers behind all conflict. Because whether you're talking about your relationship with your boss or your relationship with your employee or your relationship with your 5-year-old daughter or your husband or your wife, it's human behavior. That's all it is, right? And understanding our psychology and the drivers behind the conflict. Because it's never really about that proposal, you know? It's usually about the fact that you felt disrespected. It's
mhm.
not about the dishes, the dishwasher. It's probably about the fact that she didn't feel like a priority of this past week, right? Your kid is losing his mind over maybe he wanted spaghetti instead of this thing. It's probably not about the meal. It's about the fact that you were scrolling on your phone instead of playing with him earlier, and he's acting out. You understand what I'm saying? There's
Mhm.
always a need beneath the need. I don't even know what you asked anymore. I got so distracted. I went I went on a rant. You
No,
asked me about
no,
conflict in the workplace.
no, it was great. No, not a rant at all. It's really, I was thinking as you were saying, the conflict at work versus home, and I was thinking about this public-private, right? We do have, when we
Mm-hmm.
think about domestic abuse or whatever it might be, or somebody who's committing horrible crimes, we say, I would have never thought, about my neighbor. I would have never thought because those things that happen behind closed doors, it's we can have this feel like if it happens at work, if I yell at somebody at work, there can be immediate consequences and other people are going to hear it, especially if I'm doing it at a meeting, right? I'm either going to be fired or I build a certain sort of reputation, and it can negatively impact my livelihood and whatnot, my reputation.
Mm-hmm.
But when we do it at closed doors, and maybe it's not as nefarious as something that I just said, but it's shutting down. I'm scrolling. I'm not pulling my weight. I don't even know what my weight is. We don't have these sorts
Mm-hmm.
of conversations. Um, if I'm getting a grade of a C or I want to get my quote unquote bonus, who sees it? What was that you said the matrix? And it can, and with our loved ones, we can feel freer to let it all hang out. And yet we forget that it is those people that we love infinitely that really deserve to always, to never have the kid gloves come off. That's what you let all hang out is how much you love them and how much you treasure them and how much you would do whatever you could for them, not the, you know, the the nastiness. Not that we can't show ourselves, but in what direction? How is it presenting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it's this real deception that and the duality of who I am in public versus private. At private, I should be even more, right? I should be
Mm-hmm.
giving even more love and attention and generosity
Yeah.
than publicly.
Well, and this is exactly where the tension lies, Mary, is especially I would say 90% of the men that I work with, that that is the that is the anxiety that they feel because they've seen success in the professional world, but they come home and the home life is off or their health is off or whatever. And then there's this lack of integrity or authenticity of my insides versus my outsides, you know? And and we the imposter syndrome starts to creep up, or this fear starts to creep up. Well, what if they find out? What if they find out that I'm not a great husband? Or what if they find out that, I'm not connected to my kids or we're on the verge of divorce? How's it going to affect my career? And there's this fear, the paranoia. And it's like, I tell you, Mary, there's nothing more freeing than seeing success both personally and professionally. To know when you go to work that you're loved and treasured at home and that you are respected and admired by your peers, both is such a rewarding, freeing feeling. Now, within saying that, that takes the most work, that takes the
Right.
most effort, right?
Right.
But it's the biggest payoff because
Right.
if you want to have, you talk about having a good sleep, you'll have the best sleep of your life, knowing you're being successful in both areas.
Mhm.
But like I said, a lot of people struggle with that because one suffers usually. It's like, well, I'm going hard at work and then the family takes a hit. Or I'm going to show up for my kids. I'm going to do all this stuff, and I might be late for work. I'm going to miss deadlines, and then work is suffering. And so we don't necessarily prioritize well, and we go extreme one way or the other. And then that's that tension that lies right, and that was the tension that I was experiencing, in my sort of turning point. And when I work with my clients, that is really what we extract. It's like, well, one of the first questions I ask is, what do you want?
Mhm.
Right? I tell you, Mary, I would say the vast majority of the men that I work with, they don't know how to answer that question. They're so confused about what they want because they've spent so long building the business or building the career, and they might say things like, "Well, I want my kids to know I love them, or I want my wife to know that I love her. I want a healthy marriage." And so I'll say, "Well, okay, this is what you want, but here are your actions. If you want your kids to know that you love them and you want a healthy marriage, you haven't showed up for dinner for the past 2 weeks. Well, your actions are telling me something different than what your heart is telling me, right? And so how can we, or it could be vice versa. I want a bigger, salary. I want to make more income. I want a promotion. Okay, well, what does that look like? Because when you're at work, you might say you want this, but you're the last person to walk in the door in the morning and you're the first to leave, or you're scrolling while you're at work. So your actions are saying one thing, but your heart or your desires are saying the other thing. And so what I do is help bring connection between what they say they want and their actions, right? And bring that authenticity so that they are living. So their insides are matching their outsides, both professionally and personally. And I think, like, going back to what you said, that happens all the time. And this home life versus work life, and that's exhausting because it feels like
Mhm.
we're living two lives, and
Mhm.
that's the duality we speak of, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the $1 million question, right? So many people wrestle with, but it can be done for
Mhm.
sure. It's just we live in such an extreme. I feel like it's such a polarizing time, where you want. We live in a world where everything is at our fingertips. Everything through AI, through skip the dishes or DoorDash, whatever it is. Literally anything you want, you can get in an instant. But it's the things that really matter. You can't cheat. You can't
Mhm.
hack, right?
Mhm.
And that's why we wrestle, because we're always looking for the hack, the cheat, the fast way. We want the medal before running the race. It's like, well, no, actually, the best things in life, you got to run the race. You know, you got to have those difficult conversations with your employees or your, colleagues. You got to have those sensitive conversations with your wife, or you got to set up those boundaries in your family or at work. And that's hard. But
Mhm.
that's but that leads to the greatest fruit, both professionally and personally. But those are the things we shy away from.
Mhm.
Going back to what we said in the beginning, because what's easier? Oh, well, you should know better, right? Ignoring, compartmentalizing, and it feels as though maybe we won't have that conversation, and instead we're just gonna leave it. But what happens is resentment starts to bubble up,
Mhm.
right? And then there's this unforgiveness perhaps sometimes, and I think Nelson Mandela said this, harboring resentment is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies. It's like, man, I don't care who you are in the workplace or at home, uh, when you're not having those conversations and you're not approaching them seeking resolution, you're the one who pays the price,
Mhm.
or you're the one drinking poison. Because as long as you're holding resentment or unforgiveness, you are giving them the power. You're giving your power away constantly. Because then the next time they do the thing or they say the thing, now you're getting even more frustrated, right?
Yeah.
But now they have all the power over you. So I'm like, hey, the most empowering thing you can do is have that conversation with them to forgive them or whatever the case is, because you're going to be free. You're going to take your power back, and they're going to understand everything's just going to be so much better because of it. And these are the concepts that translate both in the workplace and at home. It's the same thing, right?
Mhm.
Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to understand what we mean by success. And if we think about home versus life, that is wrongheaded because we're one person. And I believe the quality of our life has to do with the quality of our relationships. And so
Mm,
wherever we go, we are enmeshed in relationships, whether that's work, home, community, wherever we find ourselves. And so if we want to win, if we want to be successful, that means having strong relationships. Now, how many do you need? Well, that depends on you. Just like how much money do you need? That depends on you, right? Where you live, what
mhm,
your values are, um, and all of those sorts of things. But success itself, what is long lasting? Everybody has to answer that question. And insofar as we don't really think about what the answer is to us specifically, what brings life meaning? What is that life well lived? Then we're going to be going on tangents and we're going to be beating our fists in the wind, saying we're doing all these things, but we're not achieving. If you don't know where
mhm,
you're going to go or where you want to go, you're not going to get there. And
mhm,
so I think really thinking about quality relationships, what does that look like? Quality, What does it look like to me? And therefore, what am I going to have to do to get that prize, right? Like you said, we want the medal before, but the life is the journey. You don't get to your deathbed. You're like, I won, right? No, the winning happened in the journey. The journey is it, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we're delaying until, no, it is found in the difficult conversation and in the joy of whatever the sweetness is. It's all of that's the whole process. That's the life. The life is not the
Mm-hmm.
end product. The life well lived is in the living, in the here and now, and how we're showing up in the everyday.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Simon Sinek wrote a book, I think, called The Infinite Game, and that's
Mhm.
really that concept. It's like that that is the game, and there is no winning or losing. There's just the game that you play, and the whole point of the game is to stay in the game, and win in relationships and in business and all those different things. But it's interesting because I love that you talked about this idea of success and defining it for ourselves because you're right. We chase success all the time. But here's the thing, and in my experience, we are chasing other people's version of success.
Mhm.
Right? Going back to this, hyper social media world where, we're exposed to everyone's highlight reels. It's like you got to be careful. So another thing that I do with my clients is help them define success for themselves. Because if you don't define where it is you want to go,
Mhm.
you won't know when you get there. It's like, Mary, it's like if I was like, hey, we're going to go to the beach with our families. I'll see you there. And I just hit beach in the
Right.
GPS on Google Maps. Where do you think it's going to take me? I don't know. It could be anywhere. Now I might get to a beach, but where am I going to be? I don't know. Will I like it? Will I not? Will it be cold? Will it be warm? Who knows?
Right.
And that's defeats the whole purpose. And this is what happens because we're like, oh, well, we want to go to the beach or we want more happiness, more money, more fill in the blank. And it's so ambiguous.
Mhm.
We have no idea. Or it's what someone else has modeled for us. It's it's the high school, friend who you're still friends with and you see the vacation the family went on. It's the neighbor down the street who bought the new boat. It's the brother-in-law with the new career promotion. And all of a sudden you're like, well, I want that too. Well, no, I want that too. Well, no, I want that. And before you know it, you're chasing everyone else's success. And so two things I do with my clients is, and I'd love for your listeners to consider this. One is a framework to help you understand like the bigger picture, and the second one is a real tactical thing they can do. So the first question to actually start this dreaming conversation about where you want your life to be, is this. And I'll ask you, Mary. So you don't have to answer it right now, but if I were to bump into you in the airport, in 3 years from now, and we're both traveling, and you're like, "Hey, Mitch, wow, it's been," or if I were to say to you, Mary, it's been what 3 years since I've seen you. The last time I saw you, I was on your podcast. How's life? And Mary, if you were to say to me, Mitchell, the past 3 years have been the best years of my life. Let me tell you about it. What would have to be true in your life to make them the best 3 years of your life? What's going on in your life right now in that moment? And so what we do then is we break that down over the core foundations. And then we get very, very specific. What are you doing for work? What passion projects are you pursuing? What's your income? You know, what does your marriage look like? How often do you go on date nights? What's your relationship with your kids like? Where do they go to school? What are you driving? Where are you living? Get very, very crystal clear because and I love the question, if you were to have a backyard barbecue, who would be there at that thing? Like, who are those key people in your life? And so we get a really clear picture, and 3 years is so good because 5 years is a little too far away. 10 years is certainly too far. 3 years, you can almost taste it. You can get a sense for where you're going to be. So we create a very clear picture, like a movie scene, the final scene in a movie where they're driving off to the sunset. That's where you kind of want to write it out. The second step is to write out your own success statements. And so it could be 5, it could be 10, whatever it is you want. But the statements have to go like this. I'll know I'm being successful when, fill in the blank.
Mm.
I'll know I'm being successful when. And you write out your definition of success, not what your neighbor did, not what the person on Facebook did, not what your brother-in-law did. And that could be anything you want it to be. It could be, I'll know I'm being successful when I can live on 6 months of passive income. I'll know I'm being successful when I can go to the gym 3 days a week for, 6 months in a row. I'll know I'm being successful when I can go 7 days without snapping at my kids. I'll know and you get to define what success looks like. Print it off, stick it on your wall. I don't care. Stick it to your monitor. And every so often, once every quarter, look at it. I'll know I'm being successful when. Okay. And then you'll hold yourself to that standard.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, when you finish going through the list, you're like, okay, by my definition of success, I am living a successful life. I'm fulfilled. And that is becomes an anchor because it helps you stay focused on your lane and stop comparing yourself to everyone else because comparison, spoiler alert, comparison is the robber of all joy. You want to have a miserable marriage? Compare it to someone else's. If you want to have a miserable job, compare your job to someone else's. The second you start comparing, it sucks your joy. And so staying in your lane, identifying success, and then maybe once a year, updating it, or once every, 6 months, being like, okay, and then you get to raise the bar a little bit. In that situation, it's like, okay, well, I'll know I'm being successful when I can go 2 weeks without losing my cool, or I can, whatever the situation might be for you. But that's been something that's been so helpful for my clients because it takes away that anxiety and they're
Mhm.
not stretching and reaching and trying to meet some far off distant goal, this moving target that shifts every time you log on Facebook. You know what I mean?
I love that. And I love the specific nature of it and the personalist nature of it. Because when we just say, be good, be a good father, be a good wife, be a good whatever, well, what the heck does that mean? And be successful. Well, what does that mean? And we're going to fill in the blank with somebody else. But I know for myself and the work that I do and being a writer, if I thought that, being a successful writer is, this particular national platform, then I would have stopped writing. And I had to decide, well, what do I think it means to be successful? What am I
Mm,
trying to accomplish? And once I right-sized, well, what do I really think about that and embrace that? It gave me so much more freedom to
mhm,
pursue something that I love doing. So I appreciate that so much, the specific nature and the individual nature of what is a life well lived in the
mm.
living for me, not somebody else, because it is your one life. Well, our time has completely gotten away from us. I feel like I could talk to you for a long time. So I'm going to end with this question. When you look into the future of work and you think about your kids out in the workplace, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all people be treated with dignity and respect, but that they will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why. This phrase comes to my mind, and it's very cliche, but it's timeless. Probably haven't thought about this in a long time, but I would want my children, whether it's in the workplace or at home, to really live by that golden rule, that principle: do unto others as they would have you do unto them, or do unto you. So it's like how do you want to be treated? Treat others with respect, with kindness, with love, with compassion. This idea of serving them. I think if my children were servant-based leaders and they treated everyone else how they wanted to be treated, if everybody did that, what a world that would be. But for me, man, my kids, that's how I want them to show up in the workplace. Because you can't not love someone who lives by that truly,
Mhm.
and that's what I would want for them. And I think that's what it would look like to live in a thriving workplace.
Great answer. Well, Mitch, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. I really enjoyed our conversation and everything that you shared with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mary. I appreciate the conversation, and it's been a pleasure.
And if people want to find you, how should they find you?
It's a great question. Yeah, you can go to dadnationcode.com. It's my website. Everything I offer is there. All of the podcast, the coaching, all that kind of stuff. There's a ton of free resources on there. And then, of course, if you search the Dad Nation podcast, you'll see me. You'll see my face plastered around everywhere. So, but would love to reach out. I'm serious when I say to people, like, I really value that one-to-one connection. And so a lot of times when I get a new follower on Instagram, I'll just DM them and be like, hey, thanks for the follow. What's up? where are you winning and where are you struggling? And they're always surprised. But I'm like, man, that's what life is about. You talk about the quality of your life, look at the quality of your relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And so would love to connect with you, whether it's email or social media, or reach out to the website, and just be happy to serve you any way I know how.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, Mitchell, so much. Have a great day.
You too.
Mitchell, thank you for being on Conflict Managed. I really enjoyed our conversation, and it's a little bit different than a lot of my conversations on this podcast, which I absolutely appreciate, thinking about a life well lived at home and how that affects us at work. And I loved our conversation at the end about success. What specifically is success for you? And I think when dealing with conflict, it's very clear to know what you think success is, because that can give you a reason to have those conversations that for some reason you're not having, but you really feel like you should. Conflict Managed is produced by Third Party Workplace Conflict Restoration Services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back, we have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you would like and subscribe wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, it's much appreciated. I'm so excited to be talking about my new book, which is Winning the Generation Wars at Work, Making Your Age an Asset. It is now available on Amazon. And if you live locally in West Tennessee, you can find it here as well. But it's available as well as my other book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure. Our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.